On the 22nd of September 2025, Minister for Education Helen McEntee launched the new primary curriculum. That morning, she spoke to Ciara Kelly on News Talk Breakfast, and twice in the interview, Ciara asked the Minister about whether or not gender ideology and gender identity were going to be in the new curriculum. This is that part of the interview.
And there's plenty of them that they're going through.
You mentioned things like puberty there. You are teaching things in primary school now along the lines of sexual orientation, aren't you? Heterosexuality, homosexuality, bisexuality. Gender identity has been left off the curriculum. Is there a reason for that?
So gender identity is not there, but what we are, and again, this is having consulted and engaged and gone through quite a lengthy process, what we are doing is making sure that when children are in 5th and 6th class, when they're, as I said, they've gone through puberty, many of them, and they're going into secondary school, that they understand what attraction is, that they understand what it might mean for them, what it might mean for somebody else, and that we're not ignoring this topic. It's really important that we're not ignoring something that we know young people are going through, and that we're doing so at a stage.
No, I see that. I see that the sexuality piece is in there and sexual orientation is in there, but I'm asking you specifically about gender identity and gender ideology. There was a suggestion that was going to be in there.
So again, this has happened through engagement and consultation. It's not part of the curriculum. It's not there. It's not included in it. We know of.
It's not in the curriculum. It's not there. It's not included in it. And these are the white truths of the interview. It's not there because it's over here in the Cineálta anti-bullying policies. In the last school year, the vast majority of schools have completed the ratification of their new anti-bullying Cineálta or Cineáltas anti-bullying policies. This document is the procedures document that was used to draw up those anti-bullying policies for each school. And within the procedures document, the department has prescribed particular language that must be included within each of the school policies. So all of these policies will include the terms homophobic bullying, transphobic bullying, and identity-based bullying. But I want to just, in this video, cover how gender identity and gender ideology is already in primary schools, regardless of the truth of the newly published specification documents being published last week not containing the terms, and allowing Minister McEntee to truthfully say it's not in it, it's not in the curriculum, but it is in this policy. So the first mention we have of gender identity is from the Secretary General in these procedure documents. Further down, we see it included as an example of an area where an imbalance of power can occur. An imbalance of power is one of the characteristics included within the department's definition of bullying, and there you have gender identity with gender expression. Further down, we see it again included in the verbal bullying behaviour. Often name calling of this type refers to physical appearance, for example, size or clothes worn, or gender identity. And then we are told that gender identity bullying is behaviour or language that intends to harm a student because of their perceived or actual gender identity. We also see reference there to TQ plus bullying, and again this perceived or actual idea. And TQ plus and gender identity are straight out of gender ideology and queer theory. And this procedures document was the core document used for each school to draw up their policies, and training for that was provided by IDEA, an offshoot of the department. If you go online for any school that has shared its policies on their websites, you will find their new Cineálta policies. I just went online, Googled primary school Cineálta policy, and I got this one. And like the vast majority of them, you can see that it clearly references LGBTQ+, and many of them specifically mention gender identity as well. The Cineálta policies will always include reference to transphobic and homophobic and identity-based bullying. So Minister McEntee has spoken very highly of Cineálta and Cineáltas, and she's well aware of the issues that the inclusion of gender ideology and gender identity has caused in certainly the primary school sector and also the secondary school sector. As I say, this is for every school in Ireland. She knows that the policy is being implemented on a whole school basis. So this term, gender identity and the LGBTQ plus, covers children and covers at policy level in the school children from junior infants all the way through to 6th class. So what does that mean for the classroom? If you Google Cineálta teaching resources, and you'll have IDEA and the Department of Education there. We'll head into the department link. You end up in the same place for either of them. You have Cineálta resources for primary schools, post-primary schools, and parents. So I'm just going to stick with primary schools. And these are the resources that primary schools can use for the implementation of their ratified Cineálta policies. There's quite a long list of them there. We're just going to tip into a few of them. We're going to start in the SPHE RSE toolkit. I'm just going to note as well that this Cineálta resources page was updated just in August of this year. So they are recently updated. This one was April of 2025. So at this point, the policies were getting ratified across the network of schools. So we go into the toolkit and we'll head into the 3rd and 4th class resources. And I'm just going to pick out a few. There are a lot, and there are a lot of different ones across the different age ranges, but most of them have the likes of these book lists and other kind of third-party resources produced by third parties. The reason I'm getting into this one is because during many schools' consultation on the Cineálta anti-bullying policies, some books were circulated to parents as examples of what would be added to the classroom libraries. So these would be used by children who are finished their classwork and they're waiting for their peers to do the same. They can go to the classroom library, take out a book and read while they're waiting for their friends. And there are several references to gender identity, gender expression and so on within this book list and in these books. These 3 here were circulated locally and you can view them on YouTube, but you can clearly see that the theme there of gender identity is outlined. You have gender expression there, and in that one there's quite a few of them. It's a comprehensive list of books and it's in that 3rd and 4th class tab. If we take a different tab in this 3rd and 4th class resource, you can go in here and you'll find the Different Families Same Love resource. This was produced by the INTO LGBT plus teachers group. This teachers group is particularly active in the promotion of gender ideology and queer theory in schools. You might have seen the Liam to Lucy social transition video, for example, but they also have this poster, which you might have seen in your school, and you can see that it's branded by the INTO there. And this poster is accompanied by this chart with lesson ideas to use with that poster. And you can see several references to transphobic bullying there, identity-based bullying, and this notion of a zero tolerance policy on homophobic and transphobic language. So Cineálta kind of creates a hierarchy of bullying. Some bullying is more special than others, because certainly at primary school level you would expect that they would take a zero tolerance approach on all bullying, but when you read the documents you can see that there's a particular focus on particular types of bullying. Here on this table for creating an inclusive school, you're told that it starts from junior infants, and to have various efforts made around the whole idea of transphobic bullying, and that is supported. But in most of these resources, you'll find sometimes a fairly comprehensive glossary of terms to be covered with the children. So there's a list of them there. This is broken down into covering them from junior infants all the way to 6th class. And these terms like transgender, or trans for short, transphobic bullying, and you see transgender there again, they are gender identity and gender ideology. That's that's where they come from. You'd have young children being told that transgender is a girl who feels like they are a boy, a woman who feels like they are a man, a boy who feels like they are a girl, and so on. Interestingly, on this resource, the INTO LGBT teachers group thanked Stonewall for permitting use of the slogan "Different Families, Same Love." Stonewall is a UK-based organisation that is not without its controversy regarding these kind of matters, and to find that they were acknowledged in a resource to be used with young children in Irish national schools on the Department of Education's website is a concern for some. I would find it concerning. Then there's a list of resources to be shared with parents or guardians. I assume that the intention is that it would be shared by the teacher or by the school with parents or guardians. So if you look at this one, Making the Big Talk Many Small Talks, it's for 8 to 12-year-olds. And we're just, as I said, we're going to just see if we find anything to do with gender identity in these resources to be used with children. There's a whole chapter of it in this one. And that's a sexuality wheel. And you have the term there, gender expression, gender identity, and so on. This resource clearly goes in the direction of the idea of a transgender child. There's advice for parents about if your child is exploring their gender identity or has identified as transgender, puberty can be particularly confusing. And there is reference there to gender identity and sexual orientation are often confused but are two separate things. And I'm going to note that information elsewhere at the end of this. We're told here that most people have a stable sense of their gender identity by the age of 4. And again, we'll end up here on a glossary of terms. You can see in this resource that 10A and belong to are referenced on it or thanked on it. You see again the reference to transphobic and homophobic bullying, which kind of is reflected with with the language used at the school policy level. You have a definition of gender identity there. So that's another resource that would indicate gender identity is certainly included for life in primary school. The Busybodies booklet is fairly well known at this stage. It's the one that when a third party comes in to give the talk to the 5th and 6th class, this is the resource that they usually use. And on page 42 of that resource, we're told that as well as a biological sex, we all have a gender identity. This is how we think of ourselves as a boy, a girl, neither or both. A small number of people have a deep sense of their gender identity is different from the gender that is usually linked with their sex at birth. And then we have the term transgender as well, which is indeed gender ideology. So I'll just leave the 3rd and 4th class thing there. I'm just going to note that when you head into the 5th and 6th class resources, you will find that the level and amount of gender ideology and gender identity is upped quite significantly. You have reference to it there under Busybodies. In this Amnesty International document, they have another kind of unusual explanation. They say that in sex and gender, people are born female or male, sex, but learn to be girls and boys who grow into women and men, gender. they're taught the right behaviours. This learned behaviour is what makes up gender identity and determines gender roles. So that's what's available there on that toolkit, the SPHE RSE toolkits for primary schools. Then if we go back out to where the department stores the rest of the resources for the implementation of Cineálta or Cineáltas, go down to the homophobic and transphobic bullying behaviour. There's a section in each of the policies entitled homophobic and transphobic behaviour. Generally speaking, there's a section in every one, but the language is always included. I'm just going to take a quick look into this All Together Now resource. And here we are in the Belong To website. Belong To are a very active group in the promotion of gender and trans ideology issues in schools. They're very active in secondary school. They do stand-up weeks, and they have expressed interest in doing similar in primary schools. So if we look at the All Together Now lessons, I'm not going to dwell too much in this resource, even though there is quite a lot in it. I'm just going to look for the term of interest, because it's quite a substantial glossary in this one. The gender identity is defined, of course: gender expression, transphobic bullying, heterosexuality, transgender, a person who was labelled as a boy or a girl when they were born, but deep inside they feel they're a different gender, and they make reference to the Gender Recognition Act. We're told that a cisgender is a person who is simply not transgender. But of most concern in this lesson is the fact that they cover transition. They say that it's the process of trans people beginning to live as their preferred gender, including, for example, social, medical, and/or legal transitions. And regardless of the fact at this point that an awful lot of countries and organisations and establishments have accepted reports like the Cass report and the HSS report and so many other reports, and the explanations of many groups who work in this area from a medical point of view and from a psychological point of views, that covering this material with young children is a bad idea. Here we have the Department of Education in Ireland making an anti-bullying policy for every single school that affirms gender ideology as fact, and has at least one resource that covers transition at primary school level. That's certainly gender identity, queer theory, gender ideology headed to national school. So the last resource in this that I'm going to look at is this Respect handout. This handout was published in 2015. It came as a pullout in what I believe was the INTO members magazine. I'm not an INTO member, so I didn't actually get the magazine myself. But within this document, it's the guidelines for primary teachers to address homophobic and transphobic bullying. And we have the glossary again, of course, with the various terms defined. But interestingly, it said the 3 things all schools are expected to do. They have to update their school's anti-bullying policy with this kind of definition. They want unwanted negative behaviour, and they talk about identity-based bullying, such as homophobic bullying. The second thing was they had to specifically name homophobic and transphobic bullying as examples of identity-based bullying in anti-bullying policies. And that is exactly what the Department of Education has stuck to throughout for these anti-bullying policies. And there is no engagement for anybody who has contacted the minister or the department with regard to the parental reservations around the ideological drift of that policy being used with young children in primary school. There is no room for accommodation or provision for families who don't go along with the ideological elements of that policy. And the promises made at this time, it's 10 years ago, have been very much kept, despite the new documents I mentioned previously that have been published suggesting that this is not a good direction to take with young children in school. So I fully accept the truth that in the specification documents that were published last week, there is no gender ideology or gender identity mentioned. But that certainly is not the same question as, do we have gender ideology and gender identity in primary school? We absolutely do. On the subject of the new curriculum, there is no such thing anymore as one document that is the primary curriculum. It's a collection of a variety of documents. There's a framework that was signed by Minister Norma Foley in March 2023. There are these specifications that the Minister spoke about, and the Minister and the NCCA are so proud of the amount of consultation that they did on those specifications. They're the documents that they sent out for consultation with parents, and there was reference to something like 4,000 children that they spoke to, and they spoke to parents, and they spoke to stakeholders, and they did all of that. But within that process, there was mention of toolkits that would contain the content that would be headed to the classrooms. And during the national consultation phase, the NCCA were requested on numerous occasions to issue draft versions of the toolkits for consultation, because that's the only way that parents and the stakeholders would be able to see what's headed to the classroom. And a lot of parents sought clarity on the toolkits as well as the specifications at that time. It was refused every single time. The NCCA said that there was no need to do it because they had said something like the toolkits would be, the specifications were the what of what was in the curriculum, and the toolkits would be the how, and they decided that the parents really wouldn't have needed to know that. However, we now have the first sign of life in our new toolkits. This is well-being. The well-being toolkit is going to have PE and SPHE covered as subject areas. And we have the first 4 resources in the well-being toolkit. And as was covered with the interview that Helen McEntee did with Ciara Kelly, we know that sexual orientation is on the new primary curriculum. We were told that gender identity is not in it, it's not there. But again, here we have reference to gender identity in the toolkit. We're told that sexual orientation develops and evolves over time. Sexual orientation is distinct from gender identity, and we should go to page 56. But page 56 is not up yet. So this idea that sexual orientation is distinct from gender identity is something we saw on one of the previous resources that I mentioned. So the same messaging is being carried through from the Cineálta teaching resources into the new wellbeing toolkit. So that is the end of this talk. It is just a synopsis of the various places that gender identity and gender ideology has already been secured and is in place for primary school children in Ireland.